Why can't men and women just get along? Men and women in general, there's just constant conflict. So I've thought a lot about this. And of course, as a Christian, I always look to the Bible for answers and always think about way back to Adam and Eve. And so I'm going to read some things. I'm going to go over some things just to kind of talk about this subject out loud, and hopefully it helps somebody. So in Genesis, obviously, Adam needs a helper, not a servant, a helper. So God gives him Eve. They're equal, but obviously not equal. I think we could argue that. But it should be someone that's complementary to him. If we can see it that way in our screwed up culture and society, we look for every reason not to just see men and women as complementary and able to have mutual love and respect and submission and all the things that we don't want to talk about because it might cause us to have to be selfless instead of selfish. So God gives Adam Eve, or puts Eve with Adam so that there's a helper, call it whatever you want. Anyway, ultimately, we know what happens. Eve eats from the forbidden tree. She eats the apple. We don't know what the fruit really was. She eats the apple. She eats the fruit. And of course, we can all argue about how that story went. Well, just because she ate it first, because Adam was there, I guess he was being passive, just like men. All men is passive. We can argue and bicker even about that. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, they sinned against God. They disobeyed God. God gave them curse. And that's where I want to read from the Bible, where it says in Genesis 3:16, I believe this is where the conflict started, because God said to the woman, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor, you will give birth to children. And so women are real quick to take all of that right there, that part, to be very literal, because they all know and understand the real pain that they experience during childbearing. So they want to interpret that very, very literal. Okay, it is very literal. Then the verse goes on to say, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. This is the NIV, by the way. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Nobody wants to take that so literally, but it is what it is. It says what it says, and we have to acknowledge it. I'm going to put in the video notes the scripture reference and a link to what I'm reading here on my screen. Basically, it's a site that's answering the question, how is a woman's desire for her husband a curse? It goes into an explanation of why it's worded that way. It's the Hebrew phrase in question does not include a verb and is literally translated toward your husband, your desire. And this is a predictive. The future tense verb will be blah, blah, blah. Your desire will be for your husband. The most basic, straightforward understanding is that the woman would now have ongoing conflict. So God is declaring that from that point forward, there's going to be conflict. And so that's a description of the reason the language is written the way it is. And then how that from that point forward creates contrast from the harmony that there was between Adam and Eve prior to that. So they're making an argument for why even the Hebrew language is written the way it is, to state that that from that point forward, God is saying there will be conflict and a power struggle. And it even says that the NLT translation is even more straightforward to say, you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. And what this thing doesn't say enough about that I don't like is that it doesn't say, what does he will rule over you mean? I think that because of the way it's worded and because of what is happening, God is saying that wives will try to control their husbands, but they can't. They won't be able to. They will try to, in the flesh, our nature will be to have this power struggle, and that will be our sin nature. So women will always be trying to control the men. Wives will always be trying to control their husbands, but they literally can't. And the reason for that, ultimately, and we can argue all day long, is that men are created differently, like physically. Even just the physical thing. If there was war between men and women, men win. Period. The end. There's no argument there. Men would win. And in most cases, that's true in a marriage, in a man and woman personal relationship. So it's true on the grander scale. It's true on a personal level. In most cases, again, we can argue how there's exceptions to all these things. So-and-so's wife is super strong. She could break her husband in half. I don't care. Generally speaking, most men, if all poop hit the fan, would not be controlled by a woman in the most basic nature. Now, they can be manipulated and emotionally controlled and mentally controlled, but ultimately, men have the power to not be controlled by women. And I think that's what this is saying, is there's going to be this power struggle. Men will have the power to rule over you, and you will always want to wrestle that control away from them. And then it's saying that in the New Testament, God affirms that his ideal relationship between a man and a woman is for there to, in Ephesians, be this loving willingness to submit and have mutual love and respect to one another. Husbands are supposed to love their wives unconditionally and sacrificially. Women are supposed to submit to their husband's authority in the home, in essence, refusing to scratch the curse-fueled itch to seize control. I can hear the arguments now. And you can go read this for yourself. I'm going to put the link in the notes, but ultimately it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That's the ideal. But what God says in Genesis is that our sin nature will be to always to try and rule over one another, or take control of that ruling over. But ultimately there has to be a head. And so a head of the family, someone that's ultimately the responsible one. I've heard it said a lot of times, well, he's the head, but she's the neck that turns the head. Whatever. Ultimately, God's ideal still is a mutual love and respect out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So this power struggle exists because of the curse, and it is a power struggle. And I've heard people say, well, women wouldn't have to be this way if men would lead. Well, how about when men try to lead, women won't listen? We can throw out generalizations, point fingers, and just argue and continue to bicker and have conflict, just like the curse predicted, all we want. Ultimately, we all have to learn to mutually submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Men, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Women, submit to your husband's authority in the home. That's what these things say. But it's been a constant struggle. And so one of the things that has caught my attention on this subject is the historical context of men and women's roles, and how men have been primary protectors and primary providers for the most part, because of that physical nature that I referred to earlier, where men are made to go out and be the ones that generally speaking, men are the ones that are meant to go out and fight and protect and do the really hard things that provide. Not that the things women do aren't strong things or capable things or just as important and worthy of celebration and affirmation. They are. But ultimately, when the poop hits the fan, It's the man's job to take care of business. It's his responsibility to take care of business. I've heard it said this way: when the poop hits the fan, everybody turns to look at the man to see what he's going to do. Nobody's looking at the wife to see what she's supposed. Nobody's looking at the wife as though she's supposed to be held responsible when the man is the one that's supposed to be taking responsibility for what needs to get done. That doesn't mean that there's not, again, mutual submission, respect, and love and nurture for one another through whatever that looks like. But ultimately, it's supposed to be the man's responsibility. Shauna pointed it out to me this way one time when she was reading through Genesis. She said, when God came to the garden and found that they were hiding, he addressed the man first. And I was like, wow, that's really insightful. It was the man's responsibility. So whether he was standing there passive or not, he was the one held responsible. He was the one held responsible first for the actions that took place in the garden. So there's that. But I want to show a little clip right here that for most of human history, the role of men has been to protect and provide, like I said. And so eventually that began changing. And this video is one of the best explanations I've heard about why things are so much different in the way they are today. So I'm going to show this real quick. Okay, technology issues. Let's try that again. Here we go with the video. This guy talking about male roles throughout history explained. It's pretty dang good.
You can go back to, say, the Victorian era, and men used to treat women with an extreme amount of deference because the generations living then remembered a time when the world was a lot more difficult than people now remember it being. So the physical inequality between men and women was emphasized because the world was a much more difficult place. Men took a paternalistic and patriarchal view on how women should be treated, and women wanted men to take that. They wanted to be safe, they wanted to be provided for, they wanted to make sure their children were safe, and men did what they could. Now men have won. They've, the fact we've got aeroplanes flying overhead and the fact that we're not about to be invaded is the victory of Western man. Then for some reason women decided, okay, well I'm not afraid anymore. I want what you have. You don't do the things that we do, so you can't have what we have. But men just want women to be happy. They want them to love them. They want their approval. And so if gaining women's approval means pretending women are equal to men or, saying this, that, and the other, whatever it is, they'll do it. And it's completely taken men off of the throne that they sat on. This throne was never imposed by authority, actually. It was imposed by consent. And the second women withdrew their consent for the man to be on that throne, the throne collapses and the men are just standing around going, okay, well, I guess I'll just play video games and drink beer all day and smoke weed. And if you don't need me, I won't do anything. Because that's really the whole raison d'etre of being a man, just to be needed by someone else. And it's always been women.
The only part of that I don't think I fully agree with is the part where he is saying that that role was not given to us by authority, because I do believe that God made it that way, which is authority. But the consent, that doesn't take anything away from the consent, because that's free will. And I believe that women have the power to give that consent. So what he's saying is true in the sense that women still have the power to give that consent. But God said this is how it will be, and he made it that way. And again, God's perfect design for it is for it to not be that way at all, for there to not be the power struggle either way, for there not to be a consent issue or an authority issue, for there to just be mutual everything to one another for Christ. I've also heard it said that after World War II, we had proven once again. So in that video example, the guy talks about the Victorian age and how that just is how it was back then. Well, even after World War II, we had proven once again that we can defeat evil and make the world a safe place. And with time, the need for men to protect in that way decreased because of that victory. We haven't had another world war of that magnitude since then. We've had wars. They've thankfully all been on other countries' soil, other than a few attacks here. But there hasn't been that dire need in the U.S., at least, for that kind of protection and that kind of perspective on why men are supposed to take on that responsibility or that role. And along the way, enough bad men have done bad things, and I'm referring to like womanizing and suppressing women and abusing women, that we had the women's rights movement, and in order to give more rights and protections under the law to women. And a lot of things changed for the better, but some things have gone too far. Some things have not changed for the better. Some things have changed for the worse. There seems to be a lot of men out there with horror stories of women taking everything they have and their kids by simply crying foul and the system being on the side of women because of things that were put in place in times when men deserved to be treated that way. When some men deserve to be treated that way, because some men still deserve to be treated that way in all reality, because there are more cases of men actually still being total bad words than not. But the system is now set up to wrongfully accuse and incriminate, since it's a legal situation. So yeah, I mean, the power struggle continues. It just does. And now we have women or men participating in women's sports and there's all kinds of crazy confusion about genders and gender roles and all the things. And that's a whole nother subject, sidetrack. Here's another video where, and I love this guy, and he uses the Ukraine and Israel as a recent reference to how when the poop hits the fan, we're looking to the men. We're looking for the men to do the right thing. So let's take a look at this video.
Bottom line is the last 5,000 years of human history have taught us a lot about where we actually expect men to be in society. And now that we're living in this world that is surface level, safe and prosperous, it's this idea of, well, no, I want these other things. I got news for you right now. When the T-80 starts rolling across the border in Eastern Europe, Ukrainian women weren't looking for dudes that were emotionally available and crying. They wanted a dude that could shoot a Russian. And you could say, oh, well, that's an extreme example. Is it? Because at the bottom line, at the fundamental line, they still want men to be able to provide stability and security. But if you want us to be able to do that, my gosh, can we have some appreciation for what it takes to be able to do that when it hits the fan?
Love it. So true. And he's, again, illustrating the point that men are different than women. And the roles for men and women are different. They just are. And I don't necessarily love the part about appreciation, because the fact of the matter is we have to do those things. We have to take on those responsibilities and step up with or without appreciation. I understand the plea for, hey, let's cut it out, all the cultural nonsense that's just destroying men and masculinity, and just show some appreciation. That'd be nice. But at the same time, I'm of the mindset that we have to take on those roles. We have to take on those responsibilities with or without appreciation, because if we don't, then we're allowing ourselves to be manipulated and emotionally controlled by women who are not supposed to do that, who are not supposed to have that power over us doing the right thing. And that's not only true of men with women, that's true of women with men. And that's what keeps the balance, the cooperation in check. Do the right thing. We shouldn't be fighting for the wrong things. So, let's see. Here's another one. I don't even remember what it says, but I'm sure it's good. That's why I wanted to show it.
Culture is throwing at you right now and just trash bin it. Absolute garbage. The role we play as men in society right now is totally under attack. The role we play as men, the role we play as husbands, the role we play as fathers. We are made, designed to be confident, to be competent, to be capable. We are designed to provide. We are designed to protect. And you are going to find an enormous sense of meaning and purpose in fulfilling those roles, regardless of what the latest trend out of Cal Berkeley is. I'd much rather go to scripture and to thousands of years of human history that has demonstrated that when men step into our roles and we assume them and we operate in them with honor and integrity and nobility, and yeah, to a certain degree, a certain element of tenderness toward our wife and toward our children, that is the building block of everything else. You want to solve most of the problems going on in this country right now, it's not going to be an election cycle. It is going to be strong men once again reassuming and taking pride in the position that they have as husbands and fathers. Take what.
Amen to all that. Couldn't agree more. Love it. It's a heart cry to men to be men. It's a heart cry to society, to our culture, to let men be men, to look to the right places for the right examples of good men and follow those examples. Instead of putting so much focus and attention on the wrong things, how about put more focus and attention on the right things and lead people towards that, including good men? Because let's face it, there's plenty of poor examples of women as well that we don't want to be leading our children towards. So it's the same both ways. Here's the notes that I made about that particular video. We don't teach these roles anymore because the narrative is toxic masculinity and patriarchal and colonialist and racist and anything other than, hey, let's teach young men how to have that honor and that integrity and that nobility and empathy while being strong men. Why can't we do that? Because you can't do that and tear all men down at the same time. We want there to be good men, but we won't allow the ones that are being good to be good and follow that example without making a mass effort to just tear down all men, because there are some bad ones. My notes. Boys are increasingly gay or trans, or at least that's what the liberal elite controlled media want us to believe, or they're just weak and soft. All we want is for women to be happy. Destroying manhood and masculinity is not going to accomplish that in the long run. It's time to acknowledge you cannot control men as a whole as much as you think you can. Keep pressing and you'll end up with a bunch of perfectly nice men, aka soft, who can't defend you from the evil men you have actual reasons to be offended by. When things go that far, you'll find out how much control you actually have gained over men as a whole. You will then need good men once again to win again. The sad thing is, it'll be your daughters who suffer the most. Unfortunately, many of you are just getting triggered by those words and won't even try to understand because you'd rather die on the hill of gaining an upper hand than find ways to get along the way God made us. Why do we have this conflict? What keeps perpetuating the cycle of this conflict? If both sides just continue to argue that it's the other side perpetuating the conflict, then the cycle never gets broken. I would like to, as one man, stand and say, let's break the cycle. Let's stop. Let's stop perpetuating this unending cycle of it's your fault. Because it doesn't work. It doesn't solve anything. All right, I've got another video here. He's about to talk about a cycle that, it's true. Here we go.
They always talk about strong men create good times create weak men create bad times create strong men. Bad times don't create strong men. Strong men are once again appreciated for what they bring to society in bad times. But you choose to be that. If you're waiting around for bad times to make strong men, that doesn't happen. Strong men are made by other strong men. Strong men flourish when society recognizes that the value that they bring, the stability, the leadership, when they recognize that, embrace it, and appreciate it for what it is, that's what creates the good times.
Dang. Once again, he's using that. He's talking about the appreciation. We have to be strong men first, even if it goes unappreciated. Is my note on that. But it is a cycle. I mean, that's a cycle that's real. We hear people say that cycle, and it's true. It's true. But I agree with what he's saying too. I totally agree with that. And appreciating strong men. The strong men never go away, but once they have to be appreciated, is the point he's making. Once they have to be appreciated is when they are once again put in their proper position of consent to play their role. That's why I like these videos. I like saving these videos and coming back to them and listening to them again, because I'm like, these are all little snippets of what I am always thinking and feeling and internalizing and praying about and all the things. And I come back to them and listen to them, and I make notes, and I'm like, why is this all coming together for me? Like, I want to talk about this, and I'm terrible at delivering it, but it all connects and it's all tied together, and it all makes so much sense to me. I have one last post I want to show from Instagram that is a good illustration for just how ridiculous some of this stuff can be. And it's from one of my favorite Instagram accounts, Babylon B. Says, feminists warn young girls against marrying rich, muscular football stars who love them and take care of all their needs and praise them in speeches. And then the caption says, stay far away from dangerous men like this. That is hilarious because it's so ridiculous, and that is how ridiculous all the bickering that ensued after the Harrison Butker speech was. It was asinine. In my opinion, anytime you're the subject of a Babylon Bee post like this one, you're probably on the wrong side of the perspective about whatever the topic is. The notes here say this most recent outcry over the Harrison Butker speech is a great example of women getting it all wrong, attacking each other and the guy that was simply trying to encourage all women to think differently than the narrative of today's culture and to be proud of whatever path they choose. But no, he spoke from beliefs modern feminists can't agree with, so he has to be destroyed. It's a joke. Those are my notes. I think I've pretty much exhausted what I wanted to say on this particular video about this topic of the power struggle between men and women. It's ridiculous. It's not necessary. It's not godly. It is a curse. We have to acknowledge it as such, and we have to recognize in ourselves all of the moments when we're acting out of a selfish, ego, prideful, whatever driven motive that causes us to want to rule over the other or fight for the control to rule over the other, because that's just not how it's supposed to be. Ultimately, men, we are supposed to be stepping up and taking responsibility. That doesn't mean ruling over, domineering women. Women, if you want to encourage men to take on that role appropriately, it's not by constantly tearing down, nagging, throwing stones at how he is trying to do it. Reward the right behaviors, and you'll get more of it. Yeah, let's do better on this power struggle between men and women. It doesn't have to be that way. It's crazy. All right, later.